Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for being here. My name is Andreas Bitsarakis, and I am the Director of Broadband for Select Spectrum. As you can see on this slide, you'll see my contact info, phone number, and email, as well as our website. And today, we are here to speak about CBRS and also about the band as it currently exists, which is 3.65, also known as the NN band. My goal today is to keep the overall presentation brief and not provide an overload of information. Now I'm going to keep things relatively high level. If you have any specific questions with regard to some more complex portions of CBRS, for example, maybe some of the power limits and outdoor and indoor deployments, feel free to reach out to me directly. I have received word from many that will also be participating in today's presentation that, they're just concerned with moving forward with anything because they just don't understand the dynamic of CBRS and what's really happening here. So hopefully this webinar will be informative and help with those that are kind of in that decision-making stage. I know many that are on the presentation may already have a 3.65 license. Some of you may be potentially considering obtaining spectrum rights in the 3.65 band. So today we'll speak to why you may do that and if it makes sense to or not. So again, thank you all for being here today. I appreciate you taking some time. Any questions, we will put aside some time at the end of the presentation and I will answer any of those. So first, I think we should start, and I'm sorry if some of you know this, but just to go over for those that don't, is what is CBRS? So CBRS, the acronym stands for the Citizens Broadband Radio Service, basically a spectrum plan that tasks the FCC and Department of Commerce's NTIA sub-agency to find additional spectrum that can be reallocated to serve the public interest, specifically in advancing broadband deployment. The FCC and the NTIA were able to work with the military to decide that current military spectrum allocation from 3.55 to 3.65 could be reworked to permit commercial use. So, one thing I want to mention as well is what makes CBRS spectrum different than the LTE radio interface of licensed spectrum or the unlicensed 5 gigahertz band. To use CBRS spectrum, you must request and be assigned a band by the SAS. And I'm sure everyone has heard a lot about this SAS so far. It stands for the Spectrum Allocation Server. This process of assigning spectrum is automated through the SAS and works to coordinate spectrum use. Then, when the spectrum is no longer required for use, the channel is freed up so other users can operate with minimal interference. So with that, let's kick off this presentation. So on this slide, you will see some of the likely stakeholders that will be in CBRS. So obviously we have wireless ISPs and fixed wireless mobile carriers, cable providers, satellite companies. And also you'll realize in this band that, it's getting a lot of hype and you might see some of the unusual suspects kind of enter into the spectrum world, looking for some kind of private LTE solution, trying to move away from maybe some carrier grade solutions. So you'll have critical infrastructure, oil, gas, utilities, and obviously, IoT plays. So with that, I think it's worth speaking to the diverse range of deployment options and innovative use cases, which I think would include small cell networks. Additional network layers based on small cells would allow for increased capacity where needed the most. Obviously, 5G fixed wireless access. Fixed wireless access at the 3.5 gigahertz level could deliver peak rates that few technologies can match without deep fixed fiber. Next, we would go on to enterprise neutral host, and with the traffic increasingly concentrating indoors, small cells offer a potential solution to issues associated with legacy technologies. For example, Wi-Fi. Private LTE networks, local private network utilizing dedicated radio equipment to service a premise with specific applications and services. Next, I think I would want to speak about massive MIMO hotspots. These hotspots would serve the needs of high usage, high density areas with relatively low mobility. Industrial IoT, that's an obvious one, and also some macro coverage. The emerging 5G RF technologies could enable a 3.5 gigahertz layer overlaid on the existing macro grid. Again, like I said, if you have a question, feel free, you can shoot it in there now and I'll get to it at the end of the presentation. If not, I'll set aside some time. So the big question, when will CBRS arrive? I'm sure everyone is kind of thinking the same. This is speculation, I guess, on my part, but we're hearing potentially Q3 of 2019. I think that there's still some uncertainty. Really, I feel that there's a lot of complications and things that haven't been worked out, and what that tells me internally is that it's kind of going to get pushed off until those respective things are worked out. So yeah, I think, I'm not sure. Again, the last development, what I've heard is that it's Q3 of 2019, and that would be for the GAA, General Authorized Access tier. We'll get into more about what that is a little further in the discussion. Most of you might know what it is already, but we'll go over it shortly. So now I want to speak briefly to the current CBRS status and some developments with regard to the band. So I'm sourced the most of this information from the Wind Forum, and I think what we'll start with is the ICDs, which are the initial commercial deployments. So initial commercial deployments are expected to commence no earlier than Q3 of 2019. So I think that's maybe what they might speak into with regard to something coming this year. With regard to kind of getting streamlined and out to everyone else, I'm unsure. I think personally we won't see it until 2020. I guess I could be wrong. The environmental sensing capability, also known as the ESC, that's what detects federal radar operations. It will be required before any CBRS operation within the 3550 to 3650 megahertz near the coasts. Well, we expect certification Q2 2019. I think a few of them have been certified. I've seen some news in the past couple days. The full deployment of the ESC systems will take time. An ESC network deployment requires roughly 100 to 200 sensor nodes. In the meantime, the CBRS operation is allowed in protected areas under partial ESC deployments. General authorized access, again, it's set for Q3 of 2019, no earlier than that. Full commercial GAA operation may begin as soon as one of the SAS is certified and initial commercial deployment is completed. Again, no earlier than Q3 of 2019. So now let's take a minute to look at the structure of CBRS, and I'm sure you've kind of seen this pyramid quite a few times so far. I tried creating it in a little bit of a different way, just so it didn't look like all the rest. So in the upper tier here, you have the incumbents, military radar systems along coastlines. It's protected by the ESC. And licensed fixed satellite earth stations protected geographically. So these are the incumbents to the whole band. In emergency type situations, everyone will pretty much yield to tier 1 here. Tier 2 are the priority access licenses, also known as PALs. These will be licensed to issue via commercial auction, and we'll speak a little bit more about that further in the presentation. If I had to give a guess on when we might see that auction, I'd say at earliest sometime in 2020. The rules are 7 PALs per county, 10 megahertz each, and one bidder, we'll call them, can get up to 4 PALs, so 40 megahertz in a specific area. The third tier is general authorized access, also known as GAA. So it's not unlicensed, but it's shared. The SAS would facilitate coordination among the users, as well as protect the PALs and the incumbents up here. So the GAA tier is what's most similar to how the band exists today, the 3.65 NN band. And again, we'll get into that in a little bit more detail in a few slides. Now I think it makes sense to just look at the band plan. So we're looking at 3550 to 3700 megahertz, a total of 150 megahertz. You'll see your PALs in the second tier, 70 megahertz from 3550 over here, and then the GAA is basically going to be a minimum of 80 megahertz growing from the NN band, which currently offers 50 megahertz, 3650 to 3700. And how this works is it's basically use it or lose it spectrum. So if any of these guys here aren't using their capacity, GAA users may operate opportunistically on that. So that brings up a few conversations is, potentially if there's no use by any of the PALs, a GAA user may have access to up to 150 megahertz of spectrum, maybe not on a consistent basis, maybe not 150, maybe 100, 120, something like that. But I think the question is brought up is if I'm in a very rural area and I'm looking to serve a very rural area, and there's not so much competition with regard to PALs, should I be bidding on a PAL or would I just be fine operating in GAA? And I think that's a really good question. And we can speak about that a little later in the presentation. So priority access licenses, let's speak a little bit about the specifics here. Again, 7 10 megahertz blocks are going to be auctioned by the county. There's approximately 3,200 counties, 3,200 multiplied by 7, and that's how many PALs will potentially be auctioned. Again, 40 megahertz per purchaser. The rules recently changed. Originally the rules were proposed for a 3-year initial term with potential renewal. Thankfully, they changed the rules to a 10-year term with the option to renew. So I think that's probably good for everyone that's on this presentation today, I think. They may be combined or aggregated and protected under a PPA, also known as a PAL protection area. And then this goes with the use it or share it obligation. So if you have a PAL and you're not using it, it'll be entered along with the GAA tier spectrum. The rules do provide for the ability of leases and geographic partitions. So, I think that's really positive. Say, a certain entity is looking for a private LTE solution just for their operations, which may be a warehouse or whatever it may be. They can kind of carve out that area of their operations and then lease the excess to, just for example, say a wireless ISP that wants to serve the community with fixed wireless. So I think that's good that we have that flexibility there. Now the general authorized access tier, GAA, available nationwide. Again, 80 megahertz of dedicated spectrum and operating opportunistically on the unused PAL capacity. What we've seen in recent auctions and prior auctions is you also have a lot of investors and speculators entering into the spectrum auctions. So obviously these groups don't have any intention of deploying, so they won't be using their capacity. So that's another question, which I'm not sure if I have the answer to, is, if you have some of these speculators in the band holding on to these licenses, the GAA will have more capacity for a certain amount of time, but in how many years, for how many years will that remain consistent? So say, you get a bunch, you're in a county and speculators bought up all the PALs, you're in GAA, none of the speculators are deploying, you have 150 megahertz, how long will you be able to have that 150 megahertz before that license gets assigned or sold or whatever it may be? Obviously, it's going to be different across the country considering the different situations, but I think it's something to think about. Obviously, GAA is obligated to defer to the incumbent and PAL use under the SAS control. It's unresolved whether the SAS will resolve interference issues, but I think it'll certainly help, right? That's the whole kind of point of this. So I think, going back to earlier in our conversation, there's a lot of complications and a lot of things that haven't been figured out yet. And I think we just kind of have to wait and see how this works out to get definitive answers. So now what I want to speak about, and a question I probably get daily, is what are the advantages of purchasing a 3.65 license today? So again, the band currently exists from 3650 to 3700 megahertz, and it's called the NN band. For many years, there's been a filing freeze, so you can't go to the commission and just apply for a license and get a license like you once were able to. So to be able to get a license today, how it really works is you would have to buy the license from a licensee that may hold a license or several licenses and may not be using it or doesn't have any plans to use it. And then it just really comes down to a simple assignment, which can be done in a few weeks. But what are the advantages? Why would you do that? If GAA is coming potentially Q3, why not just wait? So I think first, we don't know for sure if CBRS and GAA is going to be here Q3. So I have a lot of organizations reaching out to me. They want to become operational right now, and try to get their hands on some somewhat licensed spectrum at a relatively low cost. This could be advantageous depending on your business plan. You can get an NN license today. You can become operational. And I think what the play would be is to make sure that your equipment is Part 96 compliant and CBRS certified, considering that these licenses, as the rules currently exist, will sunset on April 20th of 2020. So really, you would be getting yourself a head start, getting your radios out there and locking down your sites, become operational. When it comes time when you have to transition to GAA, the equipment, being that it's CBRS certified, it just will require a software update. So a pretty seamless transition, I would say. No going up there and really changing much, just a software update, like I said. Now, if GAA doesn't come Q3, you're operational and you're out there and you can work and get a business going. If it does come, okay. Like I said, the rules currently exist. These licenses will sunset April 20th, 2020. I know WISPA, the Wireless Internet Service Provider Association, has a filing out there to extend the NN band out. I believe it's 5 years, so you might be able to operate a little longer. So I think that's the key there, is that you can get your equipment out there, you can get your sites locked down, and then once GAA comes around, you got a head start. A lot of the difficult work is already done. You got the legwork done. You get software transition, and you're there in GAA. So another thing to think about is alleviating your organization of SaaS costs. So I'm sure a lot of you have seen some companies have come public with what they're going to charge for the SaaS. Google in particular, I believe it was $2.25. So we have clients here at Select Spectrum say, have 10,000 subs. You're talking about to $20-something $1,000 a month to the SaaS. So even if you become operational now, and GAA comes tomorrow, just for example's sake, every month that you'd be operating in the 3.65 band, you save yourself quite a bit of money. So obviously, if you don't have too many subscribers, then it doesn't make much of a difference. But depending on what kind of business you already have, it could make a major difference. Obviously, especially if they end up extending the NN band out a little further. So like I said, I wanted to keep this really brief and high level, and we're going on almost 20 minutes now. A couple other things I'll mention for those of you that don't know. The current 3.65 licenses, they are nationwide licenses. You can place links anywhere in the country as long as you don't encumber on an existing site. I could personally introduce you to someone that works with site coordination if you're interested in learning who is currently using the spectrum in your area to see if there's going to be any congestion issues there. But yeah, this is the band that's going to transition to CBRS. So if you don't have a license now and you're interested in getting into CBRS, I say we can help you out and get you that head start so you can get your radios up there and get working. So like I said, we wanted to keep this rather brief today. If you're interested in any of the specifics, I do have all that and I can help you from there. Please feel free to reach out to me directly. And that is what we have for today. So we hope that this was informative. Like I said, really high level. Here's my contact info again. And I encourage you to reach out with any questions, or if you understand CBRS to a higher degree than what this presentation put forth, and you're looking for some of those specifics and some answers on some of the complexities, feel free.